Hello and welcome to the Cloud Council. I'm Don Poloniki, your host today. So today we're going to be discussing innovation in times of crisis, and I'm delighted to be joined by my guests, Herman Singh, founder and CEO of Future Advisory, and Ian Cohen, Chief Product and Information Officer at ICS Group. So let's consider the big question. In times of crisis, is the first role of the C-suite to modify the operating model of the business? And does that hamper the ability to innovate? Let's start with you, Herman.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Fundamentally, what the C-suite has to do in a crisis is, number one, get the data and define the mission. Once you've done that, what you want to do is unfreeze the organization, and you need to start relaxing rules. And so basically what you need to do is to start delegating decision-making down the line, fundamentally focusing on four things. You've got to figure out a way to deal with customers, clients, changing your products and changing your operations. The problem is we try often to use command and control, which just kills innovation. So I think the question's spot on.
So basically change everything while the plane's still in the air. So that sounds easy. Ian, what about your view here and your experience?
I'm not entirely sure that the onset of a crisis is necessarily the starting flag for innovation.
Yeah.
I think that's not to say you shouldn't innovate, but I do think too many companies, and there are fabulous examples over the last 8 weeks, have rushed and knee-jerked into activities that have ultimately failed. And that's not to say that you mustn't act with pace, but you really do need to understand the situation you're in. Typically, organizations that have struggled have just tried to modify what they do to a new climate without recognizing what's happening around them. Situational awareness is vitally important in times of crisis. And it's important, as Herman rightly says, you need to be very attuned to the needs of your customers and your employees. So I think the first role is absolutely to listen to what's going on around you, to create an informed point of view, and then be ready to act and act again. I don't think it's any surprise that large monolithic organizations have struggled, and the ones that are more fleet of foot have succeeded or appear to be succeeding.
And Ian, that makes sense. So there is a bit of a conflict, I suppose, in so much as, we've got some big companies and industries who are facing an existential crisis at the moment, and thinking and listening and taking things slowly, may be the end of that company. So how do you balance those two?
It's a great point, but not wanting to correct you, but I didn't say slowly. You have to act with pace and you have to act with urgency, but you don't have to knee-jerk your reaction.
Yes.
Organizations that do this right tend to have some characteristics. And I'm not a big fan of the whole digital transformation label, but the ones that are flexible, the ones that are adaptable, the ones that are already listening organizations, they're able to act and react with a high degree of pace. So it's not about slow, it's about, being considered and making the right moves, not necessarily just thinking you must go and do this immediately.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So Dom, I mean, if I can just build on what Ian said, I think that there are two questions that need to be answered in a crisis. And the first is, am I going to survive this? To your point about the existential issue. I sit on the board of two very large technology listed companies. And I've been in crisis meetings for the last 3 months, basically, because step one was, number one, how do we preserve cash? And some of the companies came very close to basically running out of cash. And banks said, look, if you can't really show me that you can build a path to break even, I'm not going to support you. So that's an existential crisis, and step one is preserve cash. Step two then is to say, okay, my customers' needs have changed in this COVID crisis. What should I be doing with my products, services, and channels to be able to pivot them? Do they need apps? Do I need remote working? And how do I make sure I move quickly to deliver that service? And then finally, there's an opportunity to build some brand new things and get some competitive advantage out of this. So step one, survive. Step two, serve. Step three, pivot to an advantage position.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing we can learn in this situation is that history repeats itself, and this isn't the first crisis that we've been through. It may be an unprecedented one, so we can draw a lot on the past here. Herman, I know you've shared a lot of stories with me in the past about crises that you've been through. What can you draw on from the past here that we can play out, that would apply here?
I mean, I'll give you two great stories. The one story is we were running a Pan-African e-commerce business in about 15 countries. And basically what happened was the price of oil crashed. And this was 2016. So what's happening now? It's happened 4 years ago. And the big problem that we had was we just ran out of foreign exchange. We couldn't pay dollars. We couldn't import. And the price of everything just doubled overnight. The Egyptian shilling halved in value, Naira halved in value, literally overnight. And the key thing that we learned to do was to sit back and say, how do we innovate with constraints? What resources do we have? How do we make sure that using the resources we have, we can get maximum leverage? The second example is we were running an e-commerce business in Iran, actually. And we had the new administration come in, heavy sanctions were imposed, and the entire e-commerce business that we built was running on Amazon Web Services, and we had to literally repivot and rebuild all of that stuff. We were given 3 months to get off the platform, and that kind of focuses the mind, because that's an existential crisis.
Yeah, you told me that story before, and I love it. So it's a great one to draw on. Ian, one that jumps to mind in your past, and this may or may not been happening at the time, but your background takes you back to Addison Lee. That industry has had a lot of disruption over the years. Anything you can share from the past there that you can draw on for today?
Herman talked about conserving cash. You absolutely have to understand your cash position and your liquidity. There's a subtle difference between asking the question, am I going to survive, and making the statement, I am going to survive. And one of the things that we did very, very quickly was understand where our revenues were sustainable, where they were rapidly diminishing. And then once you've made that level set, if you like, you can then ask the questions, and Herman is actually absolutely right. What are we famous for? What are the values and the emotions that underpin our brand? And how do we bring those to bear in this time of crisis? One of the things that Addison Lee did that was amazing was they ran a campaign and a promotion to bring NHS workers to work in a safe and trusted manner, avoiding mass transit. And that's doubling down on the values of the brand, the trust, the efficacy that you have around the value proposition of what you actually do. So you can innovate and be innovative around your core purpose. Mm-hmm. And I say Addison Lee, it was a very, very good example. It happened after I left, so I can take no credit for it whatsoever. But it was amazing to watch it from the outside, because it underscores something that I believe very, very passionately, and I think will come through in this crisis. If you have values, if you have purpose, and if you can double down on those values and purpose, even in a time of crisis, your customers will stick with you. Your customers will come on that journey with you.
So thank you very much to my guests. Really appreciated the conversation today. Fascinating insight. I'm sure our guests agree. Thanks very much for joining us on the Cloud Council. We'll see you next time.